Imagine spending $440 million on the most advanced airliner ever built, waiting 7 years for it, and then telling the manufacturer to melt it down into cans of baked beans. That is exactly what Boeing's biggest customer just did. Right now, around 30 brand new 777-9s, the largest twin-engine jets ever assembled, sit parked in Washington state. They have never carried a single passenger, and some of them are now worth less than nothing. How does a factory-fresh Flagship become financially worthless before its first flight? Why did Boeing keep building planes it wasn't allowed to deliver? And how did a decision Boeing made on a completely different aircraft come back to destroy this one? Here's what really happened. What if the safest bet in aerospace, a strategy that had worked for 100 years, could quietly turn a finished airplane into a liability worth less than the metal it was made from? That is the trap Boeing built for itself. And to understand how, you first have to understand what Boeing was building, because the 777X was never just another airplane. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of American aerospace. The original 777 was arguably the most successful wide-body in history, a machine so profitable and so beloved by airlines that it quietly killed the age of the 4-engine jumbo. The 777X was its heir, designed to finish the job, replacing the 747s and A380s of the world with a twin-engine giant that could carry nearly as many people for a fraction of the fuel. When Boeing launched the program at the 2013 Dubai Air Show, it did so with the largest product launch in commercial aviation history, racking up 259 orders and commitments worth roughly $95 billion at list prices in a single event. The message to Airbus was unmistakable. Boeing was building the king of the skies, and on paper, it earned that title. The 777-9 is the largest twin-engine airliner ever constructed, stretching 252 feet from nose to tail and seating around 426 passengers. Its carbon fiber composite wings span 235 feet, so wide that Boeing engineered something never before seen on a commercial airliner: folding wingtips, hinged sections that swing upward on the ground so the giant can still fit into standard airport gates. Hanging beneath those wings are two GE9X engines, the most powerful jet engines ever certified, each with a front fan roughly as wide as the entire fuselage of a 737. The combination promised fuel savings of 20% or more over the aircraft it replaced, with a list price of $440 million per jet. The customers lined up. Emirates alone committed to 270 aircraft across the 777X family, more than any airline has ever ordered of any widebody, staking the replacement of its entire A380 fleet on this one jet. Qatar Airways signed for 90, Cathay Pacific took 35, Singapore Airlines 30, British Airways 24, and Lufthansa, Europe's largest airline group, ordered the type to retire its aging 747-400s. Entry into service was set for 2020, and the order book made the program look bulletproof. But hidden inside that 2020 deadline was a bet, a manufacturing gamble that had worked for Boeing for decades, one so routine that almost nobody questioned it. This time, that gamble would quietly transform the company's brightest program into an $8 billion graveyard. The bet is called building at risk. Here's how it works. Certifying a new airliner takes years of flight testing, and historically, manufacturers never waited for the paperwork. They fired up the assembly line early and built actual customer aircraft while the test fleet was still flying, assuming the final certified design would match what they were building. Whatever small differences emerged, they would fix with minor retrofits before delivery. The logic was compelling. Keeping the line running kept thousands of suppliers alive, kept the workforce sharp, and meant that the moment regulators signed off, finished jets could flow straight to airlines and cash could flow straight back to Boeing. And here's the thing, Boeing had run this exact play before. During the 787 Dreamliner's troubled development, the company built dozens of early airframes ahead of certification, jets that became infamous inside the industry as the terrible teens, so riddled with rework that some took years to offload at steep discounts. It was painful, but every one of them eventually flew. The lesson Boeing's executives took away wasn't caution, it was that the strategy survives its own worst case. So when the 777X came along, nobody hesitated. So starting in 2019, the Everett factory began churning out real 777-9s, not prototypes, customer airplanes, some already wearing airline colors. Then the warnings started. In September 2019, during a ground stress test, a test airframe ruptured at 99% of its ultimate load target, with a cargo door blowing out under pressure. Problems with the GE9X engine's compressor pushed the first flight from June 2019 all the way to January 25, 2020. The schedule was slipping, but Boeing kept building. By the early 2020s, dozens of finished and half-finished 777-9s were accumulating on the tarmac at Paine Field, waiting for a certification that was supposed to be right around the corner. What almost nobody at Everett understood was that the real threat to those parked jets wasn't technical at all. It had been set in motion months before the first 777-9 ever rolled out, by two catastrophes on a completely different Boeing airplane. In October 2018 and March 2019, two brand new Boeing 737 MAX jets crashed within 5 months of each other, killing 346 people. Investigators traced both disasters to a flight control system that regulators had never properly scrutinized because for decades the FAA had delegated huge portions of certification work to Boeing itself. The company had, in effect, been grading its own homework. The MAX was grounded worldwide for 20 months, costing Boeing more than $20 billion and shattering the trust between the manufacturer and its regulator. When the dust settled, Congress and the FAA tore up the old system. Delegated certification was gutted. From now on, regulators would personally validate every flight control algorithm, every structural fitting, every software interface, on every Boeing program still awaiting approval, and the biggest program still awaiting approval was the 777X. Now think about what that meant for the 777X. The airplane had been designed and dozens of copies physically built under the old rules. Suddenly, it was being certified under entirely new ones. Every time the FAA scrutinized another system, the certified baseline design shifted, and every time the baseline shifted, the finished jets parked outside drifted further out of conformity with the airplane Boeing was now legally required to deliver. The head start was aging into a liability, one regulatory finding at a time. Meanwhile, the parked fleet was becoming a burden all its own. Wide-body jets cannot simply be left outside. Each stored airframe needed engine preservation runs, weather wrapping, and constant repositioning across Paine Field. And while they sat in the damp Pacific Northwest air, they decayed on two fronts at once. Physically, as weathering worked into the structures, and technologically, as their 2019-era avionics slid further behind the state-of-the-art every year. These jets were supposed to be generating delivery payments. Instead, every one of them was quietly consuming cash just to exist. The technical setbacks kept coming too. A GE9X issue paused testing in late 2022. In August 2024, cracks were discovered in the thrust links connecting the engines to the wings, grounding the entire test fleet for 5 months. In October 2025, Boeing took a $4.9 billion charge and pushed first delivery into 2027, bringing cumulative program losses to roughly $15 billion, with over $5 billion of it tied up in stranded, undeliverable inventory. And here is the most damning detail of all. Boeing's own CEO, Kelly Ortberg, insisted the latest delay came down to the certification process, not any new technical problem. Read that again. Nothing was wrong with the airplane. The machine flew beautifully. It was the world around the machine that had changed, and 30 finished jets were trapped on the wrong side of that change. 7 years after launch day in Dubai, Boeing faced a question no manufacturer had ever confronted at this scale. How do you fix 30 finished airplanes that were built to the wrong standard? The answer forced Boeing to construct something it never wanted, a factory dedicated to unbuilding its own jets. Inside the cavernous Everett bays where 747s were once assembled, Boeing set up what became known as a shadow factory, an operation devoted entirely to a process called change incorporation. And this is where the economics turn brutal. On a normal assembly line, technicians install components in sequence inside open fuselage sections. Change incorporation runs the entire process in reverse. Mechanics dismantle completed passenger cabins, tear open composite floor beams, cut into sealed wing skins, and rip out wiring looms, all just to reach the structural fittings buried underneath that the FAA now required to be replaced. Every step is surgical, performed around live hydraulic lines and flight control cables, where one slip means new structural damage. The result defies intuition. Retrofitting one of these parked jets consumes more labor hours than building a brand new one from scratch. And even after all that surgery, the patient comes out worse. Reinforcement plates bypass wiring and heavier brackets add roughly 1,500 pounds of permanent dead weight that a launch customer flying 16-hour routes would have to haul across the sky, burning extra fuel every single day for 20 years. All while the shadow factory drained skilled mechanics away from Boeing's active production lines, creating bottlenecks across the entire company. Then in 2025, the theory met its first real test. Airframe WH-007, line number 1611, was the 7th 777-9 ever built. It rolled out in late 2019 with a partial Emirates livery already painted on its folding wingtips, meant to be one of the very first deliveries. Instead, it sat on the Paine Field tarmac for 6 years. To bring it up to the final certified design, engineers determined they would have to cut open major pressure bulkheads and replace the primary fittings joining the wings to the body, the structural heart of the airplane. Boeing's financial analysts ran 3 numbers: the cost of the rework, the value of the finished jet, and the cost of simply building a new one. The answer that came back would shatter a century of aerospace logic. The rework cost more than the airplane was worth. It even cost more than building an entirely new 777-9 from scratch. A completed zero-flight-hour Flagship, a machine with a 9-figure list price, had a net value below zero. So in late summer 2025, Boeing did the unthinkable. Workers harvested the avionics and titanium components from WH-007 and then cut the composite fuselage apart for scrap. One of the most advanced airliners ever assembled was destroyed before it ever flew a revenue mile. And WH-007 was just the beginning. In July 2026, at the Farnborough Air Show, Emirates President Sir Tim Clark delivered the verdict on the rest of the early fleet. His airline, holding 270 commitments and more leverage over the program than anyone on Earth, formally refused the first 10 jets built for it. His reasoning was cold arithmetic. By the time they could be delivered in 2027, the aircraft would be 8 years old, half of their planned 15-year service life already consumed sitting on a parking ramp, and the modifications since those early builds, he noted, had been enormous. After 7 years of waiting, the man who launched the program had reached his limit, telling reporters that at some point, a line had to be drawn in the sand. "We're not taking that batch and that's it," Clark said. Asked what Boeing should do with 10 of the most advanced airliners ever built, he suggested Heinz might want them as baked bean cans. The launch customer of the world's flagship widebody had just publicly valued it as scrap metal. Here is the twist that reframes everything. The delay didn't destroy these airplanes, the head start did. Every jet Boeing built early was another jet locked into a design standard that no longer existed, another candidate for the shadow factory, another WH-007 waiting for its math. If Boeing had built nothing, it would have lost time. Because it built early, it lost time and billions of dollars and the airplanes themselves, and the rules that kept shifting beneath the parked fleet were not some act of regulatory malice. They were rewritten because of Boeing's own 737 MAX catastrophe. Boeing's past reached forward and strangled its future. The company dug the trap in 2019 and walked into it carrying its own flagship. So what happens now? Roughly 30 early-build 777-9s remain stranded at Paine Field as white tails, finished jets with no committed owner. For a moment in mid-2026, reports suggested United Airlines might scoop up as many as 20 of them at a discount, which would have made it the type's first American operator. Within days, United publicly ruled it out. To this day, not a single US airline has ordered the 777X. Boeing's answer has been to simply route around its own inventory. Instead of forcing reworked 2019 metal onto its customers, it began building fresh, conforming jets for delivery order. On May 7, 2026, the first true production standard 777-9 lifted off from Paine Field, a Lufthansa aircraft still wearing its bare green protective coating, flying a 3.5-hour test profile over Washington and Oregon with a complete Allegris passenger cabin already installed, the first 777-9 ever to fly with a real interior. A month later, the FAA cleared the largest remaining block of certification flight testing, but the agency's own administrator has signaled that certification now lands in 2027, 7 full years late, with Lufthansa first in line to finally retire 747s that will be pushing 30 years old, and Emirates following with factory-fresh jets. Meanwhile, the program's roughly 500 order backlog is Boeing's consolation prize, because at an estimated $50 million of profit per airplane against $15 billion in losses, Boeing must deliver around 300 jets just to climb back to zero. And every one of those 7 lost years was a gift to the silent winner of this entire saga. Airbus's A350 spent the delay hoovering up long-haul orders with no modern competitor to fight, and its freighter version arrives in 2027, right as the 777X finally limps into service. The bitterest signal came from Emirates itself. Tim Clark, the man who bet 270 aircraft on Boeing and who once dismissed the A350-1000 as defective, has begun publicly hinting that Emirates is now close to ordering it. Boeing's head start didn't just destroy its own jets, it spent 7 years pushing its most loyal customer toward the enemy. The deeper consequence reaches far beyond one program. The concurrency gamble, building customer jets before certification, was standard practice across the industry for generations. The 777X just killed it. Manufacturers on both sides of the Atlantic are shifting to strictly sequential development, where nothing is mass-produced until regulators sign off, because the 777X proved that under modern certification rules, change incorporation can cost more than the airplane itself, which leaves those 30 giants still parked in Everett, each one silently awaiting the same 3 numbers that condemned WH007. Some may eventually fly, discounted, heavier, and nearly a decade old on delivery day. Others will meet the shears, but the real threat hanging over Boeing reaches far beyond this fleet. Sooner or later, the company must launch an all-new aircraft to survive, and it will be the first clean-sheet Boeing ever certified entirely under the brutal post-MAX rules, with no head starts, no shortcuts, and a rival that no longer needs any. The 777X was supposed to secure Boeing's next 20 years. Instead, it may have revealed exactly how the next 20 years will be lost.